sorry, Mr. Mike Kesey, your line is open.
I had a question earlier on slabs. Apparently it wasn't going through, but are you going to include insulation on top of slabs?
We had no plans to do that, Mike. Is that important?
Well, you should talk to Joe at Building Science. He's recommending it.
I know they tested that at one point. I didn't know that it was being recommended.
Well, check with him.
Yeah.
It makes sense for us out here, it looks like. We're not going to put them under the slabs, and we're not going to do perimeter in Sacramento.
Okay, yeah, possible retrofit measure. I know there were a lot of challenges in doing that, but we can certainly look at adding a modeling capability.
Thanks.
Thank you.
David Beal, you may ask your question.
Yes, we're in Florida. I kind of disagree with your take on the low E films. I mean, I have some on my house, and it's not shiny, and I can see out just fine at night. Could you possibly show us where we are recommending this as a rehab step if you're not replacing the windows, that you should put a low E film on? Could you possibly show, or is it as straightforward as some of the other library entries on how we could actually define a low E film to put onto, say, a single pane metal window?
Well, first of all, I'd be very interested in seeing the information that you have. I didn't find those, so if you would, maybe we could connect by email after the meeting. I'd like to get more information on that. But in the meantime, as far as a user option goes, are you familiar with the LBL Windows software?
No.
Well,
I've seen it like 20 years ago.
Okay. Well, they have the capability. You can create your own combinations of films and glazings, and so you can do it as a user option, but it's a fairly high level of expertise. That you have to be familiar with that software. But we'd be very interested in adding those if I could get the information from you on it.
Okay. Who am I talking to?
This is Dennis Barley, B-A-R-L-E-Y.
So David, so you could kind of email that question to any of us. I think if you have Scott Horowitz's
I correspond with Scott.
Yeah, or this is Craig Christensen, myself, or from the BEopt website, you can go to contact and send it to us, and we'll get it. So any of those will work, and we will, as a group, including Dennis, who did this work, look into this. Again, we looked at this somewhat seriously. Our decision not to do this was partly that a major manufacturer had this suggestion that there were issues. So it wasn't really kind of our conclusion, but what we were hearing as we tried to research this. But certainly I understand the opportunity, especially in climates like Florida, and your personal experience is relevant. So let's discuss this further offline. That'd be very, very helpful to us.
All right.
And I guess I just throw that out to people in general, that we do a lot of work here, and we're help from the field, as it were, is that kind of feedback is something that we welcome as we try to do the implementation.
I'll be sending an email to Scott, and we can go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Debbie Coleman, you may ask your question.
Yes, hi. On the basement slab, if that slab was but an ICF wall, I guess we would use the thicker gap rather than 0. We would use the thickness of the ICF, which would most cases be around 2.5 inches.
Could you repeat the question? I didn't quite follow what you meant. Did you
which thickness are you referring to?
This would be under the slab. I noticed there was the R value for underneath, and then there was an R value at the gap, which I'm assuming is what's turned up at the edge next to the foundation.
Right.
So if the foundation is actually an ICF wall that has its integral insulation, I guess we would just use the thickness of the ICF insulation. And I don't remember if there was an option for that, but I just wondered if that was considered.
We would be interested in the R value of that wall, and we could accommodate that with our model as a special case if you wanted
Okay.
to on the gap R.
We fill in a different R. What we would do is the model that I use to generate those numbers, I would just put in the R value for your gap. So if you want to communicate with us offline, we could give you the information that you need to enter that as a user option.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Christy Appelhans, you may ask your question.
Thanks. Hi. I have a question regarding your window calculations, and I'm sorry that the screen has already moved forward from that, so I can't reference it. But when you calculate your U factor,
Which screen would you like to see?
The one that had the window table on it?
This one?
Yeah. Are you accounting with your solar heat gain coefficient factor in the calculation? Are you calculating that differently for heating-dominated climates like Idaho and Colorado as opposed to cooling-dominated climates like Florida to take advantage of the solar heat gain that's desirable in heating-dominated and not cooling-dominated?
Good question. We got these numbers along with the modeling database that the Efficient Windows Collaborative used. And in the software, there's an NFRC summer condition and an NFRC winter condition. And then I would have to go back and double check this. My hunch is that the U factors are based on the winter condition and the solar heat gain coefficients are based on summer. I believe that's the way it's done because of the fact that that's when those two factors would have their greater influence respectively.
Correct. But a very important point here, Christy, and thank you for raising the question since we didn't really make this clear, is that what Dennis just said, I believe, is correct for the factors that are displayed here. The important thing to understand is these factors are the labels for certain options in BEopt, but they are not used directly as the means of modeling the heat transfer through windows. The heat transfer, both solar gains and heat conduction in and out of the window, through the window, in and out of the building, are modeled in detail in either DO2 or Energy Plus, depending on which version of BEopt you're using.
Okay.
So these are just representative values displayed here for the options that are listed. But the modeling itself does not depend on the values that are displayed.
In this table.
So that would account for the performance in a cold climate or a hot climate more exactly.
Okay, great. Thanks. And you might consider, for the values in this table, looking at the Canadian energy rating, which does take into account in these U values the solar heat gain coefficient for a heating-dominated climate, which is really nice for those of us that are up north.
I see. Okay, we'll look into that.
Thank you.
Again, as Dennis said, we wanted to sync these up, with some other literature on Windows, but we'll definitely look at that.
Okay.
Thank you.